Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for coming on the call tonight. We're here for the story in our stars with Mary Stewart Adams. Thank you for coming on to the call. I'm Laura Scapitici, the Director of Programs for the Anthroposophical Society, and Mary's here too. Can you say hi, Mary?
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, so nice to have you here tonight. So we'd like to hear from everybody on the call and see where you are calling in from. If you've done one of these webinars before, you know we like to know who's with us from across the country and around the world. So if you can just type into the, let me see, which one would be best? The Q&A or the chat is fine. And let us know where you're calling in from or where you're watching from. And also, just so you know, anything you type in the Q&A and chat, most people can see, and that might be on the recording, just so you're aware of that. So just to keep that in mind for confidentiality. But let us know where you're calling in from. Okay, there we go. Ottawa, hello, Ottawa, Canada. Ooh, I bet it's pretty cold there right now, but I think you can ice skate on the canal to work if you live in that city, right? I have some friends that do that. Thanks for joining us, Ottawa. Yes, she's concurring. Maybe you can do that in Michigan too, where Mary's from. Anybody else want to let us know where you can let us know where you're calling in from? If you want to use the Q&A, that'd be great. Just type in as more people are joining us. We'll give everybody another minute. You can come into the Q&A and just let us know where you're at. Gonna see if there's anybody else typing in. There's another person or two. Hello, Atlanta. How are you? That is the location of our next annual conference. Did you know that? So hello, there's another person from Decatur, Georgia. So yeah, that's where our annual conference is next year in October. Beverly, Massachusetts. How nice. Anybody else want to share where they're calling in from? I'm going to take a minute just to thank you, Mary, for doing this with us. It's so nice to have you here again, laying down the star wisdom. And I don't know if anybody that's here tonight had a chance to listen to our podcast interview with Mary. I believe it was just like last week, the Story of Our Stars 2019. And that's on our podcast. It's called The Anthroposophical. And you can find that on iTunes or SoundCloud. You can look it up on our website and figure out how to access the podcast, but you alluded to some of what we're going to talk about tonight, but yes, tonight we're going to have all these beautiful images to go with it too. So we've had a few more people join us, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Los Angeles, and just thank you everybody for being here tonight. So Mary, I just have to say that in introducing you as a star lore historian, which is the most fun thing to say in the world, star lore historian, I wanted to talk about a little bit about your work. And one thing that you just told me that you do, and that is you do these cruises on the Great Lakes on Lake Michigan, right?
Yes, sometimes Huron, sometimes Superior, all around.
It's amazing. And you do these cruises where you talk about the starry sky to people that are on these, so incredible. So I know people can go to your website, storytellersnightsky.com, and that's on the slides, and find out about all the places you're going. I know you're going to be at the University of Evansville, right? And
yes, in Indiana, at the end of the month.
Cool, because you're not only, you're talking to history and astronomy classes, but you're also talking to theologians, you're going to the museum, you're going to the planetarium. I mean, that's really right out there. So thank you for doing the work you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it's really wonderful. I think the stars speak to all of us, right? And I really feel very fortunate that I get invited to come and share the story of it.
Okay,
and I love doing this too. So thank you for the invitation for the webinar. Yeah.
Sure. Well, let's get right into the webinar.
Okay, let's get right into it then. Okay. So what we're going to do, I'm not going to do so much of an astrological interpretation as much as I'm going to point at specific dates. So hopefully everybody has a calendar or a notebook so you can write down these dates. You will have access to the slides afterwards. So it's not, if you feel like you've missed something, you can go back and see those things. But what I'm most interested in is helping us to know that these phenomena are occurring, and then in knowing them, we can begin to set up activity that will kind of help us to understand, is this speaking in my life, and how can I get more engaged with it? So for instance, today we're at Ash Wednesday in the Christian calendar. If you go by the Gregorian determination for Easter in 2019. It's also one day into the first Mercury retrograde of 2019, And then it's also the day that Uranus in the tropical zodiac, the planet Uranus, has stepped back into the region of Taurus. And this is really big news in the world of astrology because Uranus moves very slowly around the sun. It takes it about 84 years, hasn't been in Taurus since the 1930s. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But for now, let's go ahead right into the first slide. And then Laura, also, you'll let me know if people are asking questions that we can address as we go, or maybe there will be opportunity at the end to field a lot of different questions. That might be the better way to do it. So on this first slide, I just called it the moons of 2019. And this is where I would really mark these things in your calendar or in your journal for what's going on with the moon. The moon is kind of the easiest thing to get a hold of in a daily experience because it's moving very quickly around the Earth. So if you imagine the moon moving in 360 degrees, it's not really moving in a circle, but just imagine that it takes the moon only 2 hours to move 1 degree of the zodiac. So it's going very quickly through. So we can have this kind of daily relationship with the moon. And the first thing that I want to point out is that the vernal full moon, the first full moon that happens after the moment of the spring equinox, is actually the same day as the equinox this year. So that's right there at the top on March 20th, 2019. And this is the full moon that's causing a bit of a brouhaha about the dating of Easter this year. Because what happens technically in the calendar rules, Easter will always be the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the sun has achieved the moment of equinox. And the calendar that determines that was established in 1582, but they fixed equinox to March 21st. But the Earth is not sitting still. It's rotating, it's orbiting the sun, and it's also wobbling. And that wobble causes a precession, which means that that moment of equinox comes further, it precesses through time. In 2019, equinox is not happening on March 21st, it's happening March 20th, and it's about 5:58 p.m. in the Eastern time zone, and then the moon will come full about 3.5 hours later. So the reason this is a really big deal is because, at least the way Rudolf Steiner describes it, Easter is not merely a festival that is placed in the calendar out of the convenience of the church celebration. It's not just something that human beings are saying, well, let's just put it here. It really has as its backdrop this celestial configuration when sun and moon are trading places in the celestial hemisphere. The sun comes back across the equator and moves into the northern celestial hemisphere. We get greater daylight. And then the moon, when it becomes full, it's always opposite the sun. So if the sun is above the equator, then that means the moon is below. So you have this change of the lights, the sun and the moon. And technically Easter would be the first Sunday after that happens, but not so this year. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on through the slides, but I also just wanted to say, so that's the first thing that's happening. And then the next full moon, which is technically the Paschal moon this year, according to the Gregorian calendar, will come on April 19th. That's on Good Friday. So there's some really interesting things happening around the dates that the moons are occurring and how they will point to which date is actually going to be Easter. Because if March 20th, if you consider that full moon, the one that witnesses the return of the sun, Easter would come on March 24th. March 24th is the feast of the Archangel Gabriel. If you were looking at the April 19th moon, that means that Easter is going to happen on April 21st, which is the peak of the Lyrid meteor shower. And both of these dates have something really interesting to contribute to the story of this year. So I'm going to talk about that more as we get to the next slide, but I just want to put those two things in mind, that either one of these moons pointing toward the sacred festival of the Easter has a certain signature, the one of the Archangel Gabriel and the other of the Lyrid meteor shower. Then we have on May 19th, what is called a true blue moon or an old school blue moon. And this will happen when you have a full moon very close to the beginning of the season. So this year we have this full moon that's just a few hours after spring begins. We end up having 4 full moons in a season. Now, the word month comes from moon. Typically we have 3 months in every season. So we should technically only have 3 full moons, but sometimes we'll end up with 4 full moons. The third one is the blue moon. So that's why it happens in the middle of the month. It's not the second full moon in one calendar month. That's just a quirk of our own calendar system. But when you have 4 full moons in a season, that's a celestial phenomena. It's a rare event. So this is where that, once in a blue moon, that saying refers to this kind of a blue moon. So it's happening on May 19th this year. You can impress all your friends by telling them that, and they'll say to you, no, that's not true. It's May 19th. How could it be blue moon? But it's the 3rd full moon when there are 4 in a season. And then in July, the moon is going to totally eclipse the sun. It won't be visible to us in the United States. It's in South America, you can see it. But not being in the geographic region of an eclipse doesn't mean that it doesn't have an effect. So the solar eclipse, when the moon is actually standing between the Earth and the sun, and it blocks the sun from the view of the Earth, this is what Rudolf Steiner referred to as kind of a safety valve on a steam engine, where there's something released. So you can imagine that what might be building up either in one's personal life or in the political environment. There's many different ways that you could look at it, that something is released at that point of a solar eclipse. So it's kind of like a gift that the steam gets let off. Then we have something that is it's just barely talked about, and that is what's called a black moon on July 31st. This is the 2nd new moon in one calendar month. Okay, so second full moon, people call that a blue moon, but only since like the 1940s, and only just recently has there been this reference to what's called a black moon. So it doesn't really mean anything. It's just that, okay, we have this coincidence, and if you're living in the right time zone, then you get this in July. You get 2 new moons in July. Then we have on August 15th, right in the middle of the month, that's the Feast of the Assumption of the Virgin into the Heavens in the Christian calendar. I usually like to call it just the Feast of the Feminine, or the Feminine Divine. We will have a full moon on that day. It's really lovely to have a full moon coincident with that festival. And again, it's something I'm going to talk about later as we go through the slides, but I want to get these dates in mind for everybody first. Then we have the harvest moon happening on September 14th. But the night before is going to be Friday the 13th. So Friday the 13th, eve of harvest moon. And just because you brought it up, Laura, I am doing a cruise that evening. And it's really funny. The cruise operator said, well, we'd rather not call it the Friday the 13th cruise. So they were a little superstitious about the date, but I was like, okay. I mean, 13 is not an unlucky number in every culture, but it does pack a whole bunch of stories into night sky storytelling when you can talk about a full moon around the time of Friday the 13th. Then on November 12th, we have a full moon, which is one day after the biggest celestial phenomena this year, which is the transit of Mercury. And what's happening is on 11/11, so November 11th, Mercury will transit directly in front of the sun, and then the very next day, the moon will come full. So it will be standing opposite Sun and Mercury. It will be very near the region where Uranus is. So this is a really dynamic aspect that's going to be happening, especially because Uranus has just moved into Taurus right now. So it's something you can begin to anticipate or look for ways that it might be operating. And I'll get to more specifics about that. And then toward the end of the year, we have the new moon on December 26th in the midnight hour. So just after midnight, between Christmas, December 25th, into the really early hours of December 26th, we have the last new moon of 2019. So these are the ones that I have marked for myself to look for, because they all have something remarkable going on in relationship to them, either because of where they fall in the calendar relative to feast days, or what other celestial phenomena are concurrent with them. So you've got those dates, and now we're going to take a deeper dive into what some of this can mean. So we could go to the next slide. So as I shared, if you look at the Gregorian calendar rules this year, then Easter is going to be on April 21st, which is the peak of the Lyrid meteor shower. So this is an image of Orpheus, and he's carrying the lyre, which is a constellation known as Lyra or Lyra in the sky. It's most prominent in the summer months, but it's one of the first meteor showers of the season. And the interesting thing about Orpheus is that he's not up there in the constellation. His story is somewhat tragic. he falls in love with Eurydice after he has developed this great proficiency with his instrument. He's not only proficient, I mean, he's exceptionally talented. He can charm life out of the rocks. He can tame the wild beasts. He can even make those of the divine world answer to his will. And what happens is he marries Eurydice, and they are deeply in love. But then after the wedding ceremony, she goes running off through the woods with her bridesmaids and is bitten by a venomous snake, and she dies. So she's taken into the underworld, and of course Orpheus is heartbroken. So he decides to try to use his talent to cross the threshold into the underworld without dying. So you've got to pass into the land of the dead without losing your life. And so he uses his gift of music. He's able to charm the wild beast that guards the gates to hell with his music, and he gets into the underworld, and he plays for the god and goddess there and asks them, with his beautiful song, "May I please have my beloved back?" And they grant him his wish on one condition. And that condition is that he can lead her back into the upper world, but he can't look back. And so he does set forth to lead her into the upper world, and he sees the light at the end of the tunnel. And just as he's about to emerge, some say it's curiosity that overtook him. There is centuries worth of story and poetry and art and lamentation about the fact that too soon he looked back and all he saw was Eurydice falling into the underworld. So he couldn't go to the underworld a second time and keep his life. So he lived very sadly after that. And then tragically, he was killed. The muses took his instrument, the lyre, and placed it in the sky as a memorial to him. But this is one of those preparation myths by the Greeks that has to do with the descent, particularly the descent of the feminine. And she's left there in the underworld. And this belongs to the time in which the Greeks were bringing their mythologies forward, because there wasn't yet the incarnation of the Christ and the mystery of ascension that comes from that story and that experience. So you have these descent myths, and then it's as though they're placed there to prepare for the time and the humanity that can tell the story of the ascent. And so if you are thinking about how the ascension in this story, then the question is, what becomes of Eurydice? And is perhaps she the one that, rather than being charmed only by the music of Orpheus, she actually could see him and loved him, and she's the one that carries his song to the earth. And so there's something really lovely about the Easter festival happening coincident with the Lyrid meteor shower in the Gregorian calendar that has this mood of an opportunity to awaken this feminine consciousness in relationship to the earth. Rudolf Steiner does make he points to the hidden Sophia behind this mystery. So I just wanted to place that there because there's a lot of talk stirring about what is the correct date for Easter this year if we're looking at celestial phenomena. I don't think it's incorrect to consider that there are two opportunities to observe Easter this year, and they're going to be different from one another. They're a month apart. The moon is going to be in a slightly different region of the sky. So it's possible to say that there's an inner and an outer Easter, or that there's a hidden one, or there's an esoteric and exoteric. There's the astronomical phenomena, and there's the ecclesiastical observance, because there will be millions of people observing Easter on April 21st, and that human energy dedicated towards something is going to be and do something. So it's fascinating to me that if we look at the first full moon of the spring on March 20th, and then pick up the first Sunday after that event as this kind of inner Easter, according to the astronomy, that would happen on March 24th, Feast of the Archangel Gabriel, who is known remarkably in our time as the one that makes the Annunciation to the mother of the Christ child, that she will bear the Christ child if she chooses to take up this task. So strong imagery of the feminine. And then in this story of Orpheus and the Lyrid meteor shower at Easter in April also has this potential for awakening this kind of feminine consciousness. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. And here's where I want to get into some of the details about how is it that we can have this phenomena where the Easter moon calculation doesn't agree with the celestial phenomena. So in the 1580s, 1582 in particular, is when Pope Gregory XIII issued his papal bull called the Intergravissimas, which is just the first words of that bull, which mean among the most serious tasks. And the most serious task at that time in the 1500s was determining the date for Easter each year. So what was happening is the astronomers that were working in the service of Pope Gregory and the calendarists looking at how they were measuring the cycle of the year, how they were following the moon to determine when the festivals were occurring, they were able to figure out that the calendar they were using, the Julian calendar, was 11 days off from the phenomena. And so if Easter is timed to the first Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox, but you're placing that 11 days off in the calendar, you're going to arrive at the wrong day for your festival. So they made a recommendation to Gregory that he adjust the calendar slowly over an 11-year period of time, take one day out a year. But what Gregory decided is, no, we're going to do it all at once. So the papal bull was issued on February 24th. In October of that year, in 1582, everybody went to bed on October 4th. When they woke up, it was October 15th, and it caused riots. And so this was not universally accepted. This was just for the Catholic Church and in the region where the Catholic Church had dominance, albeit this was a large region, but it was not worldwide. This calendar was not universally accepted as the universal civic calendar until the early 20th century. It's not until we get to like the 19 teens, I think it's Turkey and China are some of the last two countries to actually accept the Gregorian calendar. It's fascinating to consider that this calendar is introduced in 1582, takes almost 300 years for it to be universally accepted. And right around that time, not because of that, but coincidentally, Rudolf Steiner publishes the calendar of the soul. So what's happening in the Gregorian calendar, equinox is fixed to March 21st, which allows for the calendar rules for determining the date to Easter to be figured out in a rather systematic way. What Rudolf Steiner does with the calendar of the soul is say, well, we're going to start this calendar on Easter, which is a movable feast day, and we're probably going to be ridiculed by people that are outside of the Anthroposophical community because we'll be dealing with years of an unequal length. But this is where you find the forces for life, so that it forces us to engage with where are we in the cycle of the year. I also want to point out at this point that in 1924, which was the last Easter that Rudolf Steiner was alive, there was also this same incongruence between the moons. The equinox happened on March 20th in 1924. The full moon was a few hours later. And the church said, no, we don't look at that moon. It has to happen after March 21st. So Easter happened a full month later. So if you look at the lecture activity in Rudolf Steiner's life at that time, it certainly was very, very active. It's the last year of his life. There was a tremendous outpouring of work and activity. There is not a mention of this discrepancy between the astronomical full moon at equinox and the ecclesiastical full moon that was used by the church. In fact, the lectures that he gave in 1924 for Easter, the Easter festival and its relationship to the evolution of the mysteries, he talks about how the correct placement or observance of the Easter festival is actually in the fall. So just to, really keep things confusing. You have a question there?
No, I'm just saying, I just want to say you're blowing my mind here.
Okay.
I don't know if everybody else is feeling that way, but so just to go back, so you're saying in 1924, the same thing happened with the hidden Easter, with the moon.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I don't know if I would say the hidden Easter happened. I mean, we're calling it that, right?
Right,
but the
sure.
same thing happened with the moon. In 1924, the equinox happened on March 20th, and the full moon happened a few hours later, but that was not the full moon that was used by the church. They chose the moon that was a month later, and then Easter happened, I think that year it was on April 23rd, which is like as late as it can possibly be. So then when you look at Rudolf Steiner's lecture cycle, that's when he's giving the Easter lectures at the end of April. So it begs the question, at the time, you know, what system was being used to determine the moment of equinox? Like, this is a really important question, because we have to ask ourselves, how do I know that equinox is March 20th this year? Why isn't it just March 21st? Where am I getting that information? And what used to happen centuries ago is that you would have those learned people that knew how to read the sky. They would choose the site for making the best observance of the phenomena. And usually that site is where you would build the temple, or the place where you would do the ceremony. You honor the birth, you honor the dead, you do the marriage ceremony. Everything is happening at that spot where you're observing the celestial phenomena, because you're trying to understand, how does that inform the life of a human being on the earth? Now you get up to the 21st century, it's not human beings standing on the earth looking at the sky. There probably are people who do that, but you have to be watching every day, and you have to be in the same spot. So what's happening now, at least for the astronomy community, is that the astronomers use something called the Universal Celestial Reference Frame. And this is 200 and some extragalactic points. So points in space that are outside of our galaxy, that are measured to determine the relationship between the Earth and the sun. And when they get to a certain point, then they'll say, that's the moment of the equinox, or that's the moment of the solstice. So no longer is it a human being standing on the earth, looking into the environment. It's not even something that's being measured that's in our planetary system, not even in our galaxy. It's beyond our galaxy. So this is how far away we have moved from an encounter with the phenomena that way. So when we talk about, excuse me, when we talk about something like, you know, how do we, is this a hidden Easter? Like, these are questions we have to ask. Like, how do I know that the equinox moment has been achieved? What does that look like in my life as an individual? And the first step is just to know, okay, I know that this is what the astronomy community is telling me this year, that equinox is happening on the 20th. I can see that the moon is coming full. I can watch that happening. And then the church is saying that Easter is a full month later. So I really am asking all of us, let's research that. Let's reconvene afterward, like at the end of the year, and say, okay, here was the experience I had. Here was my March 24th Easter. Here was my April 21st Easter.
And then here's our fall Easter, according
Yes.
to Rudolph Steiner.
Well, right, and he puts it in the context of the Adonis festival. And so there was this sacred ceremony of taking the idol and burying it in the earth for 3 days, and this mourning and lamentation. And this is in the fall, when outer nature is dying away. Mm-hmm. And then after 3 days, that idol would be uncovered and resurrected. And there would be this great celebration of the resurrection of life forces within the human being. And it wasn't necessary to have its complement in outer nature, because there was this understanding that when outer nature goes to sleep, the inner nature of the human being awakens. And so in these lectures that Rudolf Steiner gave at Easter in 1924, he's pointing out that a time came when human beings no longer knew that within themselves, and then they had to rely on the rebirth in nature outwardly, and that's when the Easter festival gets moved to the spring.
Gotcha. Thank you. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So I'm sure everybody.
There will be reference to that. If anybody that wants to read those lectures, will have that in the references that will come with the recording.
Perfect. So, thank you. Okay. I'll let you continue. I'm sure people are getting questions or writing things down, but I'm glad you gave us all those dates up front. So okay.
Right, and give you all those details. It is a lot to think about. And you could just say, you know, I'm going to set aside those details, and I'm going to observe these 2 dates and see for myself, like, what is the experience I'm having? And that would be very valuable for our entire community, even if we never talk about it. But just to know first, there is this celestial phenomena, and then there is this calendar that is instituted by human beings in a good attempt to create a system around something that's in a constant state of motion. I mean, it's such a challenge to get to that.
Yes. Okay. So thank you.
Let's go to the next. Yeah.
Thank you.
So leaving Easter just for a moment, we're going to go on to the biggest celestial phenomena this year, which is the Mercury transit. So that should be the next slide. And this is a statue of Hermes that's at the National Museum in Rome. So Mercury is, when it transits the sun, it's that it appears to me moving directly in front of the sun. So if you were looking toward the sun with proper eye gear, you have to have filter on a telescope, or you have to have like welder's glass, something that is certified that you can look toward the sun. And in order to see Mercury, you would also have to have magnification. But it looks to us like Mercury will move like a little black dot right across the surface of the sun. And if this was the moon, we would say it's an eclipse, but Mercury's too far away, it's too small, so it can't fully eclipse the sun. This only happens 13 times a century. So it's a pretty big deal when it occurs. Astronomers use this as a way to research Mercury, looking for things like the evidence of certain gases or certain elements in the atmosphere, and just to answer questions about the physical body of that planet. And we're talking about Mercury as the planet closest to our sun. But Mercury has a fascinating reputation through many different cultures. He's usually regarded as the god of communication. He's the thief at the gates. He's the bringer of dreams. He's the trickster god. There's a lot that's connected to the story of Mercury. And you can think about its quick motion, how it's moving around the sun so quickly, making 3 apparent retrogrades a year. This lends itself to this idea that Mercury moves very quickly and changes directions. And so you can't always get a hold of it. You can't always get your hands on it. And so there's this exciting dynamic about it, but it can also be confounding if you like to be steady and know that you're going on a straight path. Mercury doesn't do that. But Mercury also has the reputation of being, I wouldn't say reputation, but can be described as the god of combining intellect. It's the Mercury forces that allow us to bring our thoughts together and to join ideas. When Rudolf Steiner laid the foundation stone of the first Goetheanum in 1913, he laid it with a document that mentioned only Mercury. Mercury, as evening star, stood in the sign of Libra, the balance. And so it's really fascinating to think about Mercury being called, kind of invoked as a witness to this deed, wherein a foundation stone would be laid for creating a community of the spirit on the earth. And so that's something that lives, you could say, to the extent that that deed was accepted by the spiritual world, this deed undertaken by a human being and by a community of people that would seek to stand on that foundation that was built, both in its being laid into the earth at the laying of the foundation stone in 1913, and then also when it's given as a meditation laid into the hearts of members and those who resonate with the Anthroposophical stream, that if that is something that is strong enough, it's being witnessed by the spiritual world, and Mercury has something to do with that. So when it makes a transit, it's interesting to consider, like, how is that living, and what is the communication God looking for, not only in the surface of the sun, but what's living in the heart of the human being. And so Mercury will, as I said, Mercury will do this transit only about 13 times a century. The last time was just a couple years ago in May of 2016, but now it's not going to happen again until November of 2023, which is putting us pretty close to the 100-year anniversary of the refounding of the Anthroposophical Society at the Christmas conference, 1923-24. So these things they lend themselves to the narrative about what might it be that the planets are doing or saying. And this isn't only for anthroposophists in the world. There are many different ways that you can look at these phenomena, but because I study anthroposophy, and this webinar is sponsored by the Anthroposophical Society, I think it's in keeping with what we're looking for through this lens of anthroposophy to speak about it this way. One of the other remarkable things about this transit, not only is it that it's happening on the 11th of November, but that it's coincident with the feast of Saint Martin of Tours. Now, Martin is described as a very pious young man, and it's his father that kind of forces him into the military service. But as he's riding his horse under the bridge at Amiens, he sees a man that's very scantily clad, or poorly clad. He's shivering in the cold and the dark, and Martin dismounts from his horse and tears his cloak in half and wraps the man to bring him warmth, to protect him. And later he has a dream vision that this is actually the Christ being, that this deed that he did for this shivering person was actually a deed he did for the Christ. And so this really augments his dedication to being a Christian, and he becomes the patron saint of outcasts and of beggars. But it's this quality of having a cape or having a resource that can be given to the other that I think is a note that's being sounded out by the Mercury transit this year, and also that is being sounded out by the other celestial phenomena. So if you were to imagine this kind of inner Easter on March 24th and its relationship to the Archangel Gabriel, he's also someone who communicates something. He brings an annunciation, and there's something about this opportunity to speak across the thresholds. And then when I think about that in relationship to Rudolf Steiner invoking Mercury, when he lays the foundation stone, it's like, okay, if we really do want to get that across that threshold, we need an escort, and the escort is always Mercury. Then also, if looking at April 21st as the ecclesiastical Easter and the relationship to the Lyrid meteor shower, Mercury, again, he's psychopompous. He's the one that would escort the souls across the threshold. So when Eurydice is going, trying to follow Orpheus up, back into the upper world, it's Mercury that's there to lead her back. So this is a really deep contemplation to have. And the next slide, I think, is some pictures of what Mercury is doing. And I'm going to give you the dates of the Mercury transits, but specifically how to contemplate it in your life, but then also the retrogrades. So the larger image on the left-hand side is from an ancient vase that shows Mercury escorting Persephone across the threshold. So that's in his role as psychopompous, as the one that takes the soul from life into death, or if you've got the ascension mystery, from the lower world back to the upper world of life. Now the bottom picture, you might not be able to tell, but that's actually a picture from the May 2016 transit of Mercury. I took it with my cell phone through the eyepiece of a solar filter telescope. So Mercury is down, it's a little black dot that's down on just about if you were to quarter that sun, it's on the lower right quarter, but toward the top of it. There's just a little dot there. Yeah, it's really hard to see. So if you do, there will probably be in every community astronomers that would be more than happy to show you the Mercury transit when it's happening. It will be visible across the United States because it's happening during the daytime when the sun is up for us in this region of the Earth. And then the image that's on the top right shows I'm going to call it the 6 stages of a Mercury cycle, beginning with a superior conjunction. So it's at the top of that circle, you see Mercury, and it says superior conjunction. So you have to imagine yourself like standing at the bottom of that circle, looking toward the sun. And when Mercury is on the other side of the sun from the Earth, we say that's superior conjunction. And then it will race around the sun and will come to that place between the Earth and the sun. And we call that inferior conjunction. And on occasion, but again, only 13 times a century, that inferior conjunction will happen when Mercury appears to go directly in front of the sun, and we get a transit. But so first you start with the superior conjunction, and then Mercury going clockwise will swing around, and you see there are 3 lines facing, coming down from the sun. 2 of them are dotted and 1 of them is solid. The dotted line on the right marks the point where Mercury makes its ingress into the shadow across which it will retrograde. And it goes all the way to the second dotted line. It will stop and swing back. So you see how it kind of does this. Normally we draw that as a loop, but if you do it as an arc like this, then you can see that it's going to go over one region of the zodiac 3 times. And so we are in a retrograde right now, which just started yesterday, but Mercury has already gone direct over the entire region that it's now about to back up over. Then it's going to stop, and then it's going to go direct again for a 3rd time over that same region, and then it's going to move on. So if you really want to understand what's going on in a Mercury cycle, you want to pay attention to all of those events, not just the moment that Mercury's retrograde, and not just be, oh, Mercury's retrograde, but really look at what's happening when Mercury's doing that. So on the next slide, I've given the dates so that, and again, you'll have these, because you'll have access to these slides, you don't have to hurry up and write all these dates down right now. But I just want to point out, I've given these 6 steps. So the superior conjunction is it's the leftmost column, when Mercury is on the other side of the sun from the Earth. The ingress is the moment that it steps into the region that it's going to cover 3 times in its retrograde. That's the date that begins. Then the retrograde starts. And during its retrograde, we get the inferior conjunction. Excuse me, I have to cough. And then Mercury will continue backward. It will stop in its retrograde, apparently to us is what occurs. And then it starts to go direct again. And then it will egress or leave its shadow. So the dates that I want to point out that to me really stood out in the narrative of what 2019 is all about are those 3 dates of the egress. So the egress for the Mercury retrograde that's happening right now is going to occur on April 17th, which happens during the Holy Week in the ecclesiastical calendar. It's actually Wednesday of the Holy Week, which is Mercury Day. That's the day when, in the description in the New Testament, it's when Mary anoints the feet of the Christ and then wipes away the oil with her hair. And out of a fallen perception of this deed of the feminine, Judas makes a decision at that moment to betray the Christ. He doesn't betray at that moment, but that's what instigates his decision. So hang on to that, because that's a really interesting relationship between the dynamic of what's going on there. Then the next egress happens on August 15th, which was a date I talked about a little bit earlier because we have a full moon that day. So this is the feast of the feminine and full moon, and Mercury is leaving its shadow. So if you wanted to imagine the shadow as being that underworld thing, this is when Mercury is leaving that underworld. It's a feast of the feminine. It's like he's offering his hand, like, come with me. We're leaving the shadow now. And then on December 8th, this is when Mercury is leaving the shadow of the retrograde that's going to include the transit. And that's coincident with the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. So all 3 of these dates this year, when Mercury is leaving the shadow of its retrograde, April 17th, August 15th, and December 8th, have something to do with a story of the feminine. So the first in this deed that Mary undertakes she's the sister of Martha and Lazarus, when she anoints his feet, which he says to Judas is something that's happening in preparation for what's about to take place with the crucifixion and the resurrection. But Judas doesn't understand this. And so he has this really, like I said, a fallen idea about what's happening there. And so Mercury is there kind of leaving the shadow, like to maybe give another perspective on the story in the narrative. And then again on August 15th at the Feast of the Divine Feminine, and then on December 8th at the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And I just want to qualify that. Again, this is a festival that's happening in the Christian calendar. If you look at the star picture behind it on December 8th, what's happening is the star Risha, which is in the constellation Pisces of the fishes, it comes to its highest place in the sky. And so it is the star that is the knot that holds the rope that binds the 2 fishes together. And the fishes, they look, Rudolf Steiner likens them to footprints. And so it's like stepping from the physical world into the spiritual world. And this star is what holds them together. So it's like this star right at that threshold. So it comes highest on that day, on December 8th. So it's coincident with this festival, but there is this really lovely star picture behind it. But this Immaculate Conception is the conception of Mary, not of the Christ being. And sometimes that's not really evident. So this is the conception by Anna of Mary, who is then born 9 months later in September. And then to her is announced by Gabriel in March that, you know, when she's much older, that she could bear the Christ child if she chooses to take up that task. So let's go to there's a lot of dates there, but what you can do in your calendar before we move on, I just want to say is what I would do is write the dates in your calendar, and then I would leave it. You could decide that maybe you're going to do something. Maybe it's something simple. Make it easy for yourself so you can actually do it. But if it's lighting a candle or creating the Mercury seal or something that speaks to the Mercury mystery in your life, and then keep a journal, but don't just be about Mercury. You want your journal to be, if you journal like an alchemist, what you're doing is trying to find the mystery of the spiritual world, and there then the human individual is revealed. So what you want to do is create a journal that allows you to recreate the day and the experiences that happened in this human life. And then as you go back and you do your review, whether it's once a month or every season, then pull out these dates and look and see, did anything happen that might have the mood of what I understand Mercury to be? Because this is the way that you can see, is there anything going on? I mean, you can hear outwardly from the astronomy community and the scientists, like, no, there's no such thing as this relationship between the human being and the planets. But you could also look into your own life and say, is anything going on coincident with these things that might suggest otherwise? And the only way I can figure it out is if I'm researching in my life. So having the dates, setting up a calendar, keeping a journal, and then regularly going back to review it is a really wonderful way to find out. And then on the 3 dates of the egress this year, I would also do something that is connected with the emergence of the divine feminine, which is what our next slide is about.
Mary, I just have to say, I love that you said journal like an alchemist.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I'll share with you that for anybody that wants to go a little bit deeper there, I'm doing an intensive study of the alchemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz in preparation for Easter. And in Rudolf Steiner's commentary about it, when he's describing day 1, he gives a very specific description of the difference between the mystic and the alchemist. And I'm not going to try to recreate it now. It would take us too far away from where we're going here. But if anybody wants to really look into that and get behind why I said like journal like an alchemist, it's coming directly from that. Because you could journal like a mystic, which is a different process.
I like them both.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
It's okay. Yeah.
I'm just going to check our time because I know people probably have questions. We've got about 14 minutes left in the actual
so I think
webinar.
that this is, yeah, we just have 2 slides after this, so bear with me. What you're seeing here, 3 different images. The image on the left is Our Lady of Guadalupe with her star cape. The image in the center is from the fairy tale Alalurau, which is also called All Fur. It's a Brothers Grimm fairy tale. And then the image on the right is a detail from Sandro Botticelli's painting of the birth of Venus. And I chose these 3, because each of them has a specific representation of the cloak. And given that Mercury is going to transit the sun this year on the Feast of St. Martin, and Martin's story has to do with providing a cloak, providing a protection, and we're also talking about this kind of emergent consciousness of the feminine. Part of what we need to be thinking about is what have we prepared to receive this emergent consciousness. So it's one thing to say it's emerging. It's another thing to say, I have prepared something to receive this. And in ancient Egyptian culture, the depictions of the starry worlds always showed these pillars of the heavens. It's the feminine. And it's the sky goddess swallows the sun at the end of the day. And as it moves through her body, the light of the sun radiating through her body is the stars that we experience. So this idea of the feminine as the one that upholds the star wisdom, this kind of goes to sleep. We start to get into the Greek culture, then you see Atlas holding up the pillars of the heaven. And then by the time we get to Copernicus, the idea that there's anything holding up the starry world is being lost. And so now when we have this emergence of feminine consciousness, I regard that as being something that is synonymous with the emergence of star wisdom. And it has specifically to do with the feminine. So particularly Our Lady of Guadalupe, she wears a star cloak. In Alalurau, she takes on the furry skin. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. It's a great fairy tale. It's just nourishment for the soul to read that tale. So it's one that you should definitely look up. And then the painting by Botticelli, this being is sometimes described as Chloris. She's a flower goddess. She works in the service of Aurora. Aurora is the goddess of the dawn. And Floris's task in the service of Aurora is to sprinkle the rose petals and the violets before the sun rises in the morning. So that color that you see in the morning sky, That's the work of Florus. And there's someone that's in love with her, and this someone steals the net of Vulcan that he crafted to catch Venus and Mercury in their illicit lovers' tryst. And he takes this net to the earth and waits at the sunrise spot to capture Florus, his beloved, so that to see, you know, if she will return his love. And that someone is Mercury. So there's just this really lovely congruence of what Mercury is doing and the story, and this idea that we are this year maybe perhaps preparing a cloak or preparing a place or a way to receive the feminine. And this is not just the work, the handwork of stitching something. It can be that, but this is kind of a quest. It's the way we come to knowing ourselves in an environment where this kind of knowledge is trying to emerge. And the signature of that quest, for me, it's kind of like what bookends the year 2019. On January 1st, there was a celestial configuration in the morning sky where the moon, as a beautiful waning crescent, was right next to the planet Venus. And this same configuration is going to happen at the end of the year, but now it will be in the evening sky. So you'll see it just after sunset at dusk, and it will look like the moon is just kind of slightly tipped over and Venus is sitting right in that chalice of the moon. And Rudolf Steiner speaks about that particular celestial configuration as being representative. He doesn't say it represents this, but that this has within it an image of the mystery of the Holy Grail. And it's a really strong imagination. And he speaks about this in the lecture, The Christ in the Spiritual World, the Quest for the Holy Grail. So it's something that you could really read as a way to enter into this mood of what this year is about. So to imagine that there's this quest to understand something, this divine relationship, not only with the feminine, but between the feminine and the masculine. And one of the ways that the Uranus moving from Aries into Taurus is described, Taurus is a sign that is ruled by Venus. So it has a feminine quality. Uranus is a revolutionary planet. It's like the rebel. It's the thing. It's the planet, the first planet discovered with the use of a telescope. So it brought something new. So one of the ways it's described is that Uranus moving into Taurus is the time of a revolutionary femininity. And so you've got Mercury kind of there escorting, you know, at the feast of St. Martin, offering a cloak, offering some type of preparation and containment for this emergent feminine consciousness, and really kind of changing the narrative, not like changing stories that are already there, but giving the next part of the story. Who is Eurydice when she arises? Who is Persephone when she's back in the upper world? What does it look like when I prepare a place for that? And so looking at the dates in the moon cycle, trying to reconcile the mystery of what's going on astronomically, what's the church doing with the Easter this year, you know, and really holding it, kind of being pregnant with it and allowing it to not fix too soon, but let it inform us. You know, there's this inner and this outer way of having this experience. And then looking at the dates that Mercury makes its egress, coincident with these feminine events in history, and then having a fairy tale, having a mythology to really nourish the soul. These are really wonderful experiences. Okay, then that leads us to Leanne Colette Derbois' translation of Rudolf Steiner's verse about the Isis Sophia. And behind this verse is this idea that through history, particularly when we get to the time of the Copernican revolution, not to the revolutionary femininity, but the Copernican revolution in the 1500s, that this being of Isis Sophia is slain and cast into cosmic spaces. This is a really lovely translation of this verse for this year when you think about creating a cloak to contain the feminine. I would just like to read it, and you will have this in the references that come with the recording. And also to mention that this painting is by Harold Rosenkrantz, and it is of the fifth apocalyptic seal, the woman clothed with the sun, the moon beneath her feet, the crown of stars, and then the dragon is in there as well. Isis Sophia, She who has been robbed of her living creative imaginations, of her cloak of stars, of her auric colors, with a brush of illusion swept away from us. She, the wisdom of the Father God, this we have lost. But by the substance of will, by the will of Christ working in our hearts, she can be refound. I would like to give a nod to my friend Lynn Stahl, who pointed out this translation to me. So I want to say thank you to Lynn. And then I have one more little poem that I wanted to end with, which is on the next slide. And then we can get to, hopefully we have time for, well, 5 minutes left for questions. This is an image of the sun setting over a very frozen Lake Michigan. And this was a few days ago when the Earth was moving through a wide swath of solar wind. And when that happens, usually folks start looking for northern lights, but also it's a really remarkable time to watch the sky, both by day and by night. There's just a different quality. It's like the sky is really tremulous. So if you follow like spaceweather.com or the NOAA website and they say, okay, we're moving through some solar wind, that's when you should just really be a sky gazer, not even just a stargazer, but just the sky. And so I wanted to close with this verse from Renea Maria Rilke, and I had to put my glasses on to see it. So, because we're just around the corner from all this phenomena that's about to take place. And in northern Michigan, this is a really good verse to read right now because we're still under a lot of snow. Springtimes have needed you, and there are stars expecting you to notice them. From out of the past, a wave rises to meet you. The way strains of a violin come through an open window just as you walk by, as if it were all by design. But are you the one designing it?
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it fits to me because we have to enter into this narrative. We have to look at these things and say, I'm part of the conversation. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's just, there's so much here. And I've written down my dates and made little stars by the divine feminine. I'm sure everyone is doing the same. So we do have a few more minutes. So I would encourage you to use the Q&A. I think not the chat, but use the Q&A and let me know if you have questions, if anyone has some questions in the few minutes we have left here. Wow, Mary, there's so much.
It's a lot to get all at once, but because it's recorded and you will get an email that has references that support it, then I felt like, okay, I could bring a lot of content. I mean, this obviously isn't even everything that's going on. This is really the way I have approached it as, what is the story this year? What can I see that's really speaking through the phenomena that helps me to build an imagination? And not just a make-believe, but imagination in the way it's described by Rudolf Steiner as an active, creative engagement with the spiritual world. And it's something that's called for now. It more and more, it's our responsibility.
Yeah, and I love that you just keep offering it back to us.
Yes.
Freedom to figure out how to work with it. It's just really
hopefully I'm giving you enough
fantastic.
direction, not just like land it on you.
No, it's I think the balance is really great.
Okay.
So we don't have anybody coming through with questions, and I think probably because of the digestion and we're all like kind of taking it in. But what I would say is people can email you all can email me and I can pass that on to Mary.
Yes, it would be wonderful to hear feedback about the content. And if you do have questions, sometimes it is a lot to take in as you're hearing it and then to like bring a question right back out. But just to share that, because it's really helpful to know. And also, if you just want to share what the experience is that you have as we go through these dates that were pointed out, or ideas that you might have about how to create ceremony around this. I'll just share that I have a fabric artist friend that lives north of me, and she has these old Italian block prints, and we're actually going to dye some silk and make that Botticelli cape. Yes, it was really
so about the cape.
Right, like to make the cape to go on the top and know that it's a resource that I have to share. It's not just my fashionable thing that I'm keeping, but how do I use this as a gesture of encounter with the human being?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary, and thank you everybody for being on the call, and thank you for everyone that's going to watch the recording after this. And it's been an absolute pleasure yet again, and I'm looking forward to it. And I see we have some more work to do here.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you
Okay.
very much, Laura.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.